we have 185 former members of Congress registered to lobby. We have hundreds, probably thousands of former aides from Capitol Hill as registered lobbyists. And they make a lot of money. Today's member of Congress's salary is about $168,000 a year, I think. Well, that's the minimum in a big lobbying firm. I mean, a lot of these guys making $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year, $1 million a year as lobbyists. It's very appealing work. And interestingly, this is an important point to me, a lot of the work these people do is completely a con job. There's a wonderful anecdote in this book, which I bumped into just by chance. There was a senator from Florida, a great friend of John F. Kennedy's, called George Smathers, who he and Kennedy used to go out with girls, I think.
Oh, they chased women together.
And Smathers was one of the first members of Congress to become a lobbyist. And the Senate historian, nice guy, smart guy, started a program of oral history where he went around talking to former senators about their careers. And I bumped into the oral history that George Smathers had given. And he describes what it was like to be an early former member in the lobbying business. This would have been in the late 60s, early 70s. And Smathers recounts, some fat cat would come to town and say, can you help me with X or Y? And I'd say, sure, let's go up and have lunch and talk about it. And I'd take him to lunch in the Senate dining room, which as a former member, he was entitled to do. And we'd just sit there, and one after another, my old pals would come up and say, hey, George, how are you? And I'd introduce them to these huge fat cats who were at my table. And we just had a good time chatting about this and that, and we'd leave. And I'd go back to my office, and I'd send them a big bill. And they'd pay it. You know what they say. They say, oh, that's Smathers. He knows everybody. He's going to be terrific. Well, it was a con job. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of kind of, oh, I'm near to the stars now. I mean, I'm in with the insiders. A lot of it is really quite phony. A lot of the lobbying campaigns, big, expensive lobbying campaigns are put on and appear to succeed. I tell the story of two of them in this book that Cassidy was involved in. One involving Taiwan, getting the president of Taiwan a visa to visit the United States, a big deal. The other was involving the Seawolf submarine, which the first Bush administration tried to cancel at the end of the Cold War. We don't need this big submarine anymore. In both cases, Cassidy was involved in huge and elaborate lobbying campaigns, and in both cases the result sought was achieved. But my reporting persuaded me that in both cases the result sought would have been achieved if Cassidy had been on vacation the whole time, that the lobbying campaign actually had no determining effect on the outcome for reasons I won't try to go into this afternoon, but it's all in the book. But in this case of the Seawolf submarine built in Connecticut, Chris Dodd and Joe Lieberman, the senators from Connecticut, were the key lobbyists, and they did a brilliant job, and they got the votes to save the Seawolf submarine. In the case of Taiwan, the idea of supporting the first democratically elected president of Taiwan, a good guy who had thrown off a corrupt old Chiang Kai-shek regime and was responsible for modernizing Taiwan, but under the terms of our diplomatic recognition with mainland China was not allowed to have a visa to the U.S. A lot of members of Congress, like me, probably like you, thought, gee, that's not fair. Why shouldn't the guy be able to come to the U.S. on a visit? So they voted for it. And I don't think there either that the lobbying campaign had any big effect. But Cassidy collected literally millions of dollars in those two cases to conduct these elaborate campaigns.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.